Blood dripped from Zora Mitchell's split lip as Officer Brennan pressed his knee into her back. "FBI doesn't mean black female imposter," he sneered, ignoring her badge. She met the eyes of a teenager, filming everything. Tonight would change both their lives forever. Before we dive into this shocking story of racial injustice and ultimate accountability, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe no badge should be above the law. How would you react if you witnessed an officer treating a federal agent this way? Let's find out what happened next in this unbelievable true story of discrimination and justice. FBI Special Agent Zora Mitchell exhaled deeply as she steered her midnight blue Audi along the quiet streets of Minneapolis. At 37 years old, she had just closed one of the most challenging human trafficking cases of her career, rescuing 23 young women from a brutal international network. The evening air felt crisp through her partially opened window as streetlights created rhythmic patterns of illumination across her dashboard. She tapped her phone screen to call her mother, looking forward to confirming details for her upcoming birthday dinner. "Hey, Mama, I'm heading home now. Just wanted to make sure we're still on for Saturday at Jasmine's place," she said, her voice carrying the subtle weariness of someone who had given everything to their work but found it deeply fulfilling. Her mother's warm voice filled the car, bringing a smile to Zora's face as they discussed menu options and who would bring what dishes. As they chatted, Zora adjusted her rearview mirror and noticed a police cruiser that had been following her for several blocks. She didn't think much of it, initially maintaining her exact speed limit pace while finishing her conversation. "Gotta go, Mama. Looks like I might be getting pulled over, though I wasn't speeding." "Love you," she said before ending the call as red and blue lights suddenly flashed behind her. Officer Richard Brennan, a 42-year-old patrol officer with 17 years on, the force watched the luxury vehicle with suspicion. He had developed what he privately considered a sixth sense for people who didn't belong in certain neighborhoods, though his colleagues recognized it simply as profiling. He ran the plates before approaching, noting the vehicle was registered to a Z. Mitchell information that did nothing to soften his already forming judgment. Zora pulled over, promptly positioning her car properly along the curb, turning off the engine, and placing her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, procedures she knew by heart both professionally and personally as a black woman in America. She took measured breaths as the officer approached his flashlight beam, scanning aggressively across her interior, before landing directly in her eyes, temporarily blinding her. License and Registration Officer Brennan demanded without preamble, his tone immediately confrontational and laced with an edge that suggested he had already categorized her. "Good evening," Officer Zora replied with deliberate politeness. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The beam of light remained fixed on her face as Brennan's expression hardened. "You were doing 42 in a 35 zone. License and registration now." Zora knew with absolute certainty she had been doing exactly 35 miles per hour, but she nodded calmly. "I'm going to reach for my documents in the glove compartment," she stated clearly, moving with deliberate slowness. "I also work in law enforcement," she added casually, hoping to establish a professional courtesy. Something in Brennan's demeanor shifted at her words, his posture becoming more rigid, his expression darkening with what appeared to be disbelief mixed with disdain. "Is that right?" he asked, skepticism dripping from every syllable. "And what department would that be?" The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. As Zora reached toward her purse for her credentials, Brennan's hand immediately moved to his holster. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, drawing his weapon with alarming speed. "I was reaching for my FBI credentials," Zora explained calmly, freezing in position. "I'm going to move very slowly." Traffic had begun to slow around them, drivers rubbernecking at the scene of a black woman being held at gunpoint by a police officer. Brennan grabbed his radio, his gun still trained on Zora. "Dispatch, I need backup at Lexington and Grand. Got an uncooperative subject claiming federal status." He emphasized the word claiming with obvious disbelief. Zora remained perfectly still, her heart racing despite her outward calm. This wasn't the first time she had faced prejudice in uniform or out, but having a weapon pointed at her during a routine traffic stop added a new level of danger to a familiar scenario. She thought of her FBI tactical training instructor's words. Sometimes your best weapon is your composure. A memory flashed through her mind of her first year as an agent when a local sheriff had refused to acknowledge her authority at a crime scene until her white partner intervened. That incident had been humiliating. This one was potentially deadly. Brennan's voice cut through her thoughts, harsh and commanding. "Step out of the vehicle now. Keep your hands where I can see them." His gun remained pointed directly at her as nearby cars began to slow and pull over witnesses to a scene that was rapidly escalating beyond any reasonable response to a routine traffic stop. Zora opened her car door with exaggerated slowness, narrating each movement with clear, precise language. "I am opening the door with my left hand. I am now stepping out with my left foot, then my right. My hands are visible at shoulder height." Despite her meticulous compliance, Officer Brennan immediately rushed forward, grabbing her shoulder and roughly spinning her to face the vehicle. "Hands on the car, spread your legs," he commanded, kicking her feet farther apart with his boot. The cold metal of the car pressed against Zora's cheek as she maintained her professional demeanor. "Officer, I am Special Agent Zora Mitchell with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have identification in my jacket pocket. I'd like to show you my credentials." Brennan's laugh was sharp and dismissive, echoing in the evening air. "Right, and I'm the Director of Homeland Security. You people always think you're so clever with your little stories." The phrase "you people" hung in the air between them, its meaning unmistakable. A small group of bystanders had begun to gather on the sidewalk, maintaining their distance, but clearly watching the interaction with concern and curiosity. Among them was 17-year-old Marcus Washington, a high school student who had been walking home from basketball practice. Something about the officer's aggressive stance and the woman's calm dignity made him pull out his phone and begin recording. "Officer, I understand your caution, but I am requesting that you allow me to identify myself properly as a federal agent," Zora stated firmly, maintaining her composure despite the growing humiliation of being pressed against her vehicle. The wail of approaching sirens announced the arrival of backup, and a second patrol car pulled up behind Brennan's. Officer Kevin Jenkins stepped out, approaching the scene with a hand resting casually on his holster, scanning the situation with practiced eyes. "What have we got, Rich?" he asked, taking in the well-dressed woman pinned against the expensive car and the small crowd watching from a distance. "Got someone here playing dress-up claims she's FBI," Brennan replied with a sneer. "Gonna check her for weapons, then see what kind of fake ID she's carrying." Jenkins nodded, but something in his expression suggested discomfort with the situation. "Ma'am, are you carrying any weapons?" he asked directly. "I have my service weapon holstered at my right hip under my jacket," Zora replied evenly. "I also have my FBI credentials in my left inner jacket pocket. I would like to show you those first with your permission." Jenkins glanced at Brennan, who reluctantly nodded. "Slow movements," Jenkins instructed. "Just the ID first." With deliberate care, Zora reached into her jacket and produced a leather credential wallet which Jenkins took and opened. The gold FBI shield gleamed under the streetlights alongside her photo identification card and commission. Jenkins studied it carefully while Brennan peered over his shoulder. "These look real enough," Jenkins admitted, sounding surprised. Brennan snatched the credentials from his partner's hands, examining them with obvious skepticism. "Good fakes," he declared after a moment. "Probably ordered them online. These people get more creative every year." Without warning, he roughly pulled Zora's arms behind her back and slapped handcuffs around her wrists, the metal digging painfully into her skin. "Impersonating a federal officer is a serious offense," he said loudly, as if performing for the gathering crowd. "You think just because they're letting people like you into positions through quotas and affirmative action that we'd believe you're actually FBI, please?" Zora winced as he tightened the cuffs another notch, but her voice remained steady. "My supervising officer is Assistant Special Agent in charge Raymond Torres at the Minneapolis field office. His direct number is 612-555-7890. I suggest you contact him immediately to verify my identity." Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Zora and his partner. "Rich, Maybe we should call this in, verify her credentials, before taking her in Brennan's face, flushed with anger. You believe this act? Next thing, she'll be claiming she knows the president. These people always have some fake ID or story. From the edge of the gathering crowd, Marcus adjusted his position to get a better angle with his phone camera. Zora noticed him and made deliberate eye contact, her expression communicating a silent message that he seemed to understand instantly. He nodded almost imperceptibly, continuing to record. Brennan noticed the exchange and turned sharply toward Marcus. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Turn that off right now," he shouted, taking a threatening step toward the teenager. Marcus backed away but kept filming. "I know my rights, sir. This is public property and I'm not interfering." Several other bystanders had their phones out now as well. Brennan's face contorted with rage as he roughly grabbed Zora by the arm and began marching her toward his patrol car. "Jenkins, deal with these people. I'm taking our federal agent to the station." He emphasized federal agent with mocking sarcasm. As Zora was forced into the back seat of the patrol car, she saw Marcus slip away from the crowd, phone still in hand, disappearing around the corner, with what might become the most important evidence in what was rapidly evolving from a traffic stop into something far more serious. The squad car pulled into the precinct parking lot with a sharp jerk, as Officer Brennan deliberately braked hard, causing Zora to lurch forward awkwardly against her restraints. The handcuffs bit deeper into her wrists as she struggled to regain her balance in the back seat. "Welcome to the 8th Precinct Special Agent," Brennan announced with exaggerated emphasis on her title, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He yanked open the door and roughly pulled her from the vehicle, making no attempt to help her maintain her footing as she stumbled onto the asphalt. The fluorescent lights of the station seemed harsh after the darkness of the patrol car, as Brennan paraded her through the main entrance, his hand gripping her upper arm with unnecessary force. The busy precinct momentarily hushed as heads turned to observe the well-dressed black woman in handcuffs being led through the bullpen area. "Got a live one here," Brennan announced loudly to the room at large. Caught her impersonating a federal officer, complete with fake badge and everything. Several officers looked up from their desks, expressions ranging from mild curiosity to visible discomfort at the spectacle Brennan was creating. A few exchanged glances that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd witnessed such behavior from him. Sergeant Mike Reynolds, a veteran desk sergeant with salt and pepper hair and a permanent furrow between his brows, looked up from his computer. "You verify those credentials, Brennan?" he asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. "Course I did," Brennan scoffed. "You think I can't spot a fake? She's got a whole story about being in the Minneapolis field office, probably researched it online. These scammers get more sophisticated every day." Zora stood straight despite the awkward position of her cuffed hands. "I would like to make my phone call," she stated clearly, "and I request to speak with the watch commander immediately." Her calm professionalism contrasted sharply with Brennan's agitated state. Brennan laughed, looking around at his colleagues as if expecting them to join in. Listen to her talking like she learned procedure from Law and Order. "You'll get your phone call when I decide you get it, sweetheart." The endearment came out like an insult. "Until then, you can cool your heels and think about the charges you're facing." Without waiting for a response from the sergeant or anyone else, Brennan steered her toward the hallway leading to the interrogation rooms. He selected one at the end of the corridor, opening the door with a dramatic flourish. "Your office for the evening, Agent Mitchell," he said, pushing her into the small room furnished only with a metal table and 2 chairs. "Make yourself comfortable." The door closed with a definitive click, leaving Zora alone with her hands still cuffed behind her back. Hours passed with excruciating slowness as Zora sat in the sterile interrogation room. She used the time to center herself, controlling her breathing and reviewing her options. Her thoughts drifted to her career path, the challenges she had overcome to reach her position. After graduating summa cum laude from Howard University, she had completed her JD at Harvard Law before being recruited by the Bureau. Over 13 years as an agent, she had led investigations that brought down human trafficking networks, dismantled white supremacist terror cells, and exposed corruption in local governments. Her record was impeccable, with commendations from 2 FBI directors. The irony wasn't lost on her that after all the dangerous criminals she had faced, She now sat handcuffed in a police station because of one officer's prejudice. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus Washington sat on his bed with trembling hands as he uploaded the video to multiple social media platforms. The footage was clear, showing Zora's calm compliance, her identification as an FBI agent, and Brennan's aggressive response and racist comments. Within minutes, the video began accumulating views, shares, and outraged comments. The hashtag number #FBIWhileBlack started trending locally, then nationally. At the FBI field office, Special Agent Daniel Cohen was growing concerned. His partner Zora had not checked in after closing the trafficking case, which was unusual for her meticulous professionalism. He tried her cell phone again, receiving no answer. As he debated whether to activate protocol for a missing agent, his phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made his blood run cold: "Black woman claiming to be FBI agent, arrested by Minneapolis police." The accompanying thumbnail showed a familiar face. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, clicking on the video. As the footage played, his expression morphed from concern to outrage. He immediately recognized his partner of 3 years being handcuffed, despite clearly identifying herself as FBI. Without hesitation, he burst into ASAC Raymond Torres's office, without knocking, his phone extended. "Sir, we have a situation. It's Mitchell." Torres, a barrel-chested man with 25 years of bureau experience, took one look at the video and was on his feet, already reaching for his jacket. "Get a team together," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Call the police chief and the captain of the 8th Precinct. Tell them we're coming in, and if a hair on her head is harmed, I will personally see their entire command structure dismantled." As the FBI mobilized, Police Captain Eleanor West was already dealing with the fallout. A 24-year veteran and one of the few female captains in the department, West had been alerted to the viral video by her teenage daughter. After watching it twice, she called the station while simultaneously getting dressed to head in. "This is Captain West. Is Officer Brennan still on shift?" she demanded. Upon confirmation, her next words were clipped and precise. "Have him in my office the moment I arrive, and find out where the woman he arrested is being held. Do not process her any further. I repeat, halt all processing." As West sped toward the precinct, Zora continued her solitary wait, unaware that outside the confines of her small interrogation room, forces were already in motion that would dramatically alter the course of the night. Have you ever experienced or witnessed racial profiling? Comment number 1. If you believe police should face harsher penalties for abusing their power, or number 2, if you think they need better training to address implicit bias. Don't forget to like this video if you think everyone deserves equal treatment under the law regardless of their race or appearance. Subscribe for more stories exposing injustice and the fight for accountability. What do you think will happen when Captain West confronts Officer Brennan about his actions, and how will the FBI respond when they discover one of their agents has been wrongfully detained? Stay tuned as this shocking situation continues to unfold. Captain Eleanor West strode into the precinct with the focused intensity of a gathering storm, her police badge gleaming against her hastily donned blazer. The night shift officers straightened instinctively as she passed her reputation for no-nonsense leadership preceding her like an invisible wave. She'd built her career on integrity and accountability, rising through the ranks, despite the resistance that came with being both female and reform-minded in a traditionally male-dominated institution. "Where is he?" she demanded of the desk sergeant, who wordlessly pointed toward the break room. Without knocking, she pushed open the door to find Officer Brennan casually leaning against a vending machine, coffee cup in hand, laughing with 2 other officers who immediately fell silent at her entrance. "My office." Now she ordered, her tone leaving no room for discussion. As Brennan followed her down the hallway, his swagger noticeably diminished. West's assistant handed her a tablet displaying the viral video, which had already accumulated over 100,000 views and was being picked up by local attempts to Daction Stebio news stations. Inside her office, she closed the door and turned to face Brennan, who had adopted an expression of wounded innocence. "Explain yourself, officer," she said, placing the tablet on her desk where the paused video displayed Zora Mitchell's face. "Captain, With all due respect, I was just doing my job. Brennan began, his tone defensive yet somehow smug. I pulled over a suspect who presented what appeared to be fraudulent federal credentials. In my professional judgment, West cut him off with a raised hand. Your professional judgment, she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Was it your professional judgment to ignore proper procedure for verifying federal credentials? Was it your professional judgment to make comments about quotas and affirmative action hires? Tell me, Brennan, does your professional judgment typically include racist remarks and excessive force during routine traffic stops? Brennan's face flushed red, partly from embarrassment, but mostly from anger at being challenged. You don't understand what it's like out there, Captain. These people are getting more sophisticated with their scams. She was driving an expensive car in a neighborhood where these people, West interrupted again, her eyes narrowing. Choose your next words very carefully, Officer Brennan. The warning hung in the air between them. Before Brennan could respond, West's phone rang. She answered it, listening for a moment before her expression hardened further. Yes, sir. They're already here, I understand. We'll cooperate fully. She hung up and fixed Brennan with a stare that could have frozen fire. That was the chief. The FBI is in the building. Not just any FBI agents, but the assistant special agent in charge of the Minneapolis field office and a tactical team. They're here for Special Agent Mitchell, the woman you've had sitting handcuffed in an interrogation room for the past 3 hours, while you made absolutely no effort to verify her legitimate credentials. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Brennan's face. There's been a misunderstanding, he began, but West was already moving toward the door. Agent Mitchell is to be released immediately. Give me your badge and gun. You're on administrative leave pending investigation. Brennan's face contorted with disbelief. You're suspending me. Based on some social media outrage. This is ridiculous. I was protecting this department from an impersonator. In the lobby of the precinct, Assistant Special Agent in charge Raymond Torres led a team of 6 FBI agents through the security checkpoint, their expressions grim and focused. The Minneapolis police officers present watched with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity as the federal agents moved with unified purpose through their station. Torres, a broad-shouldered man whose graying temples belied his physical fitness, approached the desk sergeant directly. I'm here for Special Agent Zora Mitchell, he stated firmly. I want to see her immediately, and I want the officer responsible for her detention identified and present. The atmosphere in the station had transformed from routine evening operations to tense anticipation as word spread that FBI agents had arrived. Down the hallway, an officer unlocked the interrogation room door, where Zora had been waiting. You're being released, he said, simply avoiding her eyes as he uncuffed her. Zora stood and stretched her stiff shoulders, maintaining her dignity despite her wrinkled clothes and the lingering pain in her wrists from the too tight handcuffs. She said nothing as she followed the officer back toward the main area of the precinct, where she was immediately spotted by her supervisor. Mitchell Torres called out, striding toward her with evident relief. The other agents formed a protective semicircle around her as Torres quickly assessed her condition. Are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Zora shook her head, though the bruises forming on her wrists told their own story. I'm fine, sir. Thank you for coming. Her voice remained steady, her professionalism intact, despite the ordeal. We're here now, Torres assured her, placing a supportive hand briefly on her shoulder, before turning to face Captain West, who had emerged from her office, with a visibly agitated Brennan in tow. Captain West Torres acknowledged with a curt nod. I believe you have one of my agents. West stepped forward, her expression a careful balance of professional courtesy and genuine regret. Assistant Special Agent in charge Torres on behalf of the Minneapolis Police Department. I want to extend my sincere apologies to Agent Mitchell and to the Bureau for this inexcusable incident. I assure you that we are taking immediate action. She gestured toward Brennan, who stood sullenly beside her, his badge and gun conspicuously absent. Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation which will include a comprehensive review of his service record and previous complaints. Brennan's face darkened with fury. This is a joke, he spat. I was doing my job. How was I supposed to know she was really FBI? It's not exactly common to see. That's enough. West cut him off sharply. But the implication of his unfinished sentence hung in the air. Not exactly common to see black female FBI agents. Torres's expression hardened. Captain West, I appreciate your prompt action, but this is far from over. The Bureau will be conducting its own investigation into this incident as a potential violation of federal civil rights statutes. We'll need complete access to Officer Brennan's personnel records, body camera footage, dashcam video, and any previous complaints filed against him. Brennan's confidence visibly faltered as he realized the seriousness of his situation. Around them, the precinct had gone eerily quiet. Officers and administrative staff watching the confrontation unfold, with varying degrees of discomfort, shame, and in some cases, vindication. As Zora prepared to leave with her FBI colleagues, she noticed several officers averting their gaze, while others offered apologetic nods. She held her head high, her posture impeccable, despite the exhaustion and lingering shock of the evening's events. Outside the precinct, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, alerted by the viral video and the unusual sight of multiple FBI vehicles parked haphazardly near the entrance. Camera lights flashed as Zora emerged, Torres protectively at her side. Agent Mitchell, can you comment on your wrongful arrest? Will you be filing charges against the officer? Do you believe this was racially motivated? The questions came rapid fire from the assembled journalists. Zora paused briefly, her expression composed. I have no comment at this time, she stated clearly. The appropriate procedures will be followed to address this incident. With that, she allowed Torres to guide her toward a waiting Bureau vehicle, leaving the clamor of questions behind them. As the FBI convoy pulled away from the precinct, Torres received a call that caused him to exchange a meaningful glance with Zora. We've identified the young man who recorded the video, he informed her. Marcus Washington, 17 years old. He's receiving threats online after posting the footage. We're establishing a protective detail for him and his family. Zora nodded, her mind already shifting from her own experience to concern for the teenager who had become an unexpected ally. Finally alone in her own vehicle following the FBI escort back to the field office, Zora allowed herself a moment of vulnerability that she had carefully suppressed during the entire ordeal. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as the adrenaline that had sustained her began to ebb, replaced by a complex wave of emotions, anger, relief, exhaustion, and a deep, resolute determination that what had happened to her would lead to accountability and change. 1 week after the incident that had transformed from a routine traffic stop into a national conversation about race and policing, Zora sat in a conference room at the Minneapolis FBI field office reviewing the mounting evidence against Officer Richard Brennan. The walls were covered with timeline charts, photographs, and printed complaints that created a disturbing pattern of misconduct spanning his 17-year career. Internal Affairs investigator Sofia Rodriguez, a sharp-featured woman in her early 40s with 20 years of police oversight experience, spread another file on the table between them. This makes 23 formal complaints filed against Brennan in the past 5 years. Alone, she said, her Puerto Rican accent becoming more pronounced with her growing indignation. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal abuse, improper searches. Every single case was dismissed for insufficient evidence or officer's statement contradicts complainant's account. Zora studied the latest complaint from a black college student who alleged Brennan had held him at gunpoint during a traffic stop for a broken taillight, claiming he matched the description of a robbery suspect. The pattern is undeniable, she observed, noting how closely the young man's experience mirrored her own. What's extraordinary is that he's managed to evade consequences for so long. Torres entered the conference room with a grim expression, carrying a laptop. You're going to want to see this, he said, placing the computer on the table and turning it to face them. Our cyber team found Brennan's online activities. He's been active in several white supremacist forums under the username Thin Blue Line 1488. The number 1488, a well-known white nationalist code combining the one four-word slogan with 88 representing Heil Hitler, caused Rodriguez to inhale sharply. Jesus, she muttered, scrolling through the posts Brennan had written, many too vile to read aloud. Some explicitly detailed his techniques for intimidating minorities during stops and suggested methods for ensuring complaints wouldn't stick. Asac Torres rubbed his forehead, the weight of the investigation evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. Mitchell, the Bureau is concerned about your continued involvement in this investigation, given your personal connection to the case. Zora straightened in her chair, her expression resolute. With all due respect, sir, my personal experience gives me insight no one else on this team has. I can remain objective while using that perspective to strengthen our case. Torres studied her for a moment before nodding. The director agrees. You'll continue working with Investigator Rodriguez as lead agent on this case, but I want regular updates and absolutely everything by the book. Brennan's attorney will look for any procedural misstep to discredit our investigation. Rodriguez closed the laptop, unable to stomach more of Brennan's hateful rhetoric. Speaking of attorneys, he's hired Victor Sandoval. Big-name police defense lawyer, specializes in misconduct cases. Already giving interviews, claiming Brennan is being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. Zora wasn't surprised. Sandoval had built his reputation defending officers accused of excessive force and civil rights violations, often successfully by shifting focus to the victim's past or painting officers as embattled heroes, making split-second decisions. Across town, 17-year-old Marcus Washington sat in his family's modest living room, struggling to concentrate on his calculus homework as news coverage of the incident played softly on the television. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, some supportive messages from friends and strangers alike, others containing threats explicit enough that his parents had contacted the police. An FBI agent now sat in a car outside their home, a precaution that simultaneously reassured and unsettled the family. Marcus's mother entered the room, gently lowering the television volume. "There's a Detective Williams here to see you," she said, concern etching lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks earlier. The detective, a black woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Thank you for the courage you showed that night," she said without preamble. "We need more young people willing to document what they witness." She explained that she was part of a newly formed task force reviewing all of Brennan's previous arrests and stops. "Your video broke the dam," she told him. "People who were afraid to come forward before are calling us now. We've identified patterns going back years." As Detective Williams spoke with Marcus about potentially testifying if the case went to trial, Zora and Rodriguez were interviewing Janet Cooper, a 54-year-old black elementary school teacher who had filed a complaint against a black elementary school teacher, Brennan, 3 years earlier after being handcuffed and detained for matching the description of a shoplifter. "I kept telling myself it was just one bad officer," Cooper said, her hands fidgeting with a tissue. "After I filed the complaint, I started getting pulled over constantly. Different officers always in the same precinct. Minor violations that would earn white drivers a warning at most. I eventually changed my route to work to avoid that area entirely." Her experience wasn't unique. As the investigation progressed, Zora and Rodriguez uncovered what appeared to be a network of officers who protected one another, retaliating against citizens who filed complaints and covering up misconduct. The evidence suggested that while Brennan might have been the most blatant offender, he operated within a system that tacitly condoned his behavior. Meanwhile, Brennan had become the center of a growing media storm. Suspended without pay, he had taken to giving interviews, portraying himself as a victim of cancel culture and anti-police sentiment. His attorney Sandoval had launched a sophisticated PR campaign featuring testimonials from citizens Brennan had supposedly helped and fellow officers praising his dedication. Officer Brennan has served this community with distinction for almost 2 decades. Sandoval told reporters outside the courthouse after a preliminary hearing. He is being crucified for doing his job in an environment where police officers must make split-second decisions under incredible pressure. This rush to judgment based on a deceptively edited social media video is exactly what's wrong with America today. The strategy was working with certain segments of the public. Online forums were filled with supporters claiming Brennan was being sacrificed to appease the mob and questioning why Zora had been driving in that neighborhood in the first place. Protests had formed on both sides, with police reform advocates demanding Brennan's termination and prosecution, while counter-protesters waved thin blue line flags and carried signs reading "Back the Blue" and "Support our police." The polarization frustrated Zora, who found herself the subject of intense scrutiny and increasingly harassment. Anonymous messages filled her professional email, ranging from racist vitriol to veiled threats. A local police union forum had posted her home address until the FBI legal team had it removed. Despite Torres's concerns, she refused the security detail he offered. "I won't be intimidated," she told him firmly. "That's exactly what they want." The pressure intensified when the department's legal representatives approached Zora with a settlement offer, a substantial financial payment in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and dropping all potential claims against declaratives. The department. "It's a standard offer in these situations," the city attorney explained, sliding the document across the table. "The department acknowledges the unfortunate misunderstanding and wants to make this right without a protracted legal battle that would benefit no one." Zora didn't even pick up the paper. "I'm not interested in a settlement," she stated firmly. "This isn't about money. It's about accountability, and ensuring this doesn't happen to someone else who might not have the resources or platform that I do." The city attorney's expression tightened with barely concealed frustration. "Agent Mitchell, I strongly urge you to reconsider. These cases rarely result in the kind of justice you're seeking. The offer on the table is generous and allows everyone to move forward." Zora stood, effectively ending the meeting. Moving forward requires addressing the underlying problems, not covering them up with confidential settlements. My answer is no. As she left the meeting, Rodriguez was waiting in the hallway, her expression uncharacteristically animated. "We found something," she said, falling into step beside Zora. The tech team recovered dashcam footage from Brennan's patrol car that was supposedly corrupted during the upload process. Turns out he's been manually deleting incriminating footage for years, but the system maintains ghost files for 90 days before permanent deletion. Zora quickened her pace, a surge of adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. "Show me," she said, knowing they might have just discovered the key evidence that would break the case wide open and reveal the true extent of Brennan's years of unchecked abuse of power. The recovered dashcam footage played on the large screen in the FBI conference room, casting harsh blue light over the grim faces of the assembled investigators. "Play it again," Zora requested, leaning forward as the tech specialist rewound the clip. The footage showed Brennan approaching a car driven by an elderly black man, his tone immediately aggressive. "You people never learn, do you?" Brennan's voice came clearly through the speakers. "Driving through this neighborhood like you own it." The elderly man's respectful responses and attempts to explain he was visiting his daughter were met with escalating hostility until Brennan dragged him from the vehicle, the rest of the confrontation occurring just out of frame. But the audio capturing the man's pained protests and Brennan's racial slurs. "That's from 8 months ago," Rodriguez noted, checking the timestamp. The complaint was filed but dismissed when Brennan claimed the dashcam malfunctioned and no footage was available. She clicked to the next file. "We've recovered 15 similar incidents so far, all following the same pattern." The systematic nature of Brennan's misconduct was staggering. The recovered footage revealed not only his habitual targeting of people of color, but also the participation of at least 3 other officers who had backed his false accounts or helped suppress evidence. In one particularly disturbing clip, Officer Jenkins, who had been present during Zora's arrest, could be heard advising Brennan, "Remember to say he reached toward his waistband in your report." The investigation had expanded beyond Brennan himself to encompass what appeared to be an entrenched culture of discriminatory policing within certain precincts. "The Police Officers Federation issued a statement this morning," Torres said, sliding a printout across the table. The police union's official response walked a careful line, initially defending Brennan's right to due process, while distancing themselves from any confirmed misconduct. It concluded with a paragraph expressing concern about rush to judgment based on isolated incidents that don't represent the dedicated service of the vast majority of officers. Zora noted the strategic positioning, how it simultaneously protected the union's interests while creating space to abandon Brennan if the evidence became overwhelming. Outside the conference room window, she could see protesters gathering in the plaza below, their numbers growing daily as community organizations rallied around calls for police accountability. Many carried signs with Zora's image alongside other victims of police misconduct, while counter-protesters maintained their own vigils supporting Brennan and police under attack. Among the most vocal activists was Marcus Washington, who had emerged as a powerful voice despite his youth. Now, under the mentorship of established civil rights leaders, he had founded Record and Report, a youth movement, teaching others how to safely document police interactions. He's received scholarship offers from 3 universities with strong social justice programs, Torres mentioned, following Zora's gaze to where Marcus was addressing a group of reporters. Kids turning this experience into something meaningful. The investigation had uncovered numerous previous victims of Brennan's racism, including James Watkins, a 73-year-old Vietnam veteran who had been slammed against a wall during a stop for suspicious behavior that consisted of waiting for a bus after dark. His interview, broadcast on national news, had been devastating in its simplicity. "I served this country only to come home and be treated like I don't belong here." That officer didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a father of 4 or a retired school teacher. He just saw my skin. As public pressure mounted, cracks began to appear in Brennan's formerly confident demeanor. His attorney's calls to the prosecutor's office had shifted from dismissive demands to tentative inquiries about potential plea arrangements. The change accelerated when one of Brennan's fellow officers, facing potential charges himself, offered to testify against him in exchange for immunity. Brennan's facade finally shattered during an unexpected late-night call to Zora's office line. "Mitchell," she answered, recognizing the precinct number on her caller ID. "This witch hunt has gone far enough." Brennan's voice was slightly slurred, suggesting he had been drinking. "You think you've won, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm not going down alone." Zora immediately signaled to a colleague to trace and record the call. "Officer Brennan, anything you want to say should go through your attorney," she replied calmly. "I'm not the enemy here. I'm just following the evidence." His laugh was bitter and cold. "Evidence? You've seen nothing. You think I'm the problem. I'm just following the playbook. There are people above me who've been running this system for decades. I could give you names that would blow this whole thing wide open." Zora maintained her composure despite her racing pulse. "If you have information about broader misconduct, we should discuss that properly with your attorney present. It could certainly be considered in your case." There was a long pause before Brennan spoke again, his voice lower, almost conspiratorial. "What if I told you the lieutenant signed off on everything? What if there's a quota system for certain neighborhoods? What if officers who don't play along get the worst shifts, the most dangerous assignments?" The implication was clear, and it aligned with patterns they had already begun to identify. With Torres's approval, Zora arranged a formal interview for Brennan to potentially provide evidence against superior officers, with his attorney present and prosecutors offering consideration for cooperation. However, when the meeting took place, Brennan's demeanor had changed dramatically. With Sandoval at his side, he denied making any specific allegations against fellow officers or superiors. "My client was under extreme stress and may have exaggerated certain aspects of departmental procedure," Sandoval explained smoothly. He maintains his innocence of any intentional wrongdoing. Despite this public retraction, Brennan's late-night call had provided valuable direction for the investigation. Focus shifted to Lieutenant James Harper, Brennan's direct supervisor, who had signed off on the dismissal of numerous misconduct complaints. Financial records revealed suspicious deposits to Harper's accounts following the dismissal of several high-profile complaints. More disturbing were Harper's connections to known white nationalist organizations, carefully obscured but detectable through donations made through shell entities. As Rodriguez and Zora prepared to present their findings to the grand jury, Brennan made another unexpected move, reaching out through back channels to offer a full confession and testimony against Harper and others in exchange for reduced charges. The prosecutors, seeing an opportunity to address the broader systemic issues, agreed to meet. During a tense 5-hour interview, Brennan revealed the extent of the corruption unofficial directives to increase stops in minority neighborhoods, a points system rewarding officers for drug arrests and asset seizures, and systematic suppression of complaints through intimidation and evidence tampering. Most damning was his description of a group of senior officers who called themselves the Guardians, dedicated to maintaining traditional policing against reform efforts. Harper told me from day one that certain neighborhoods needed a heavier hand. Brennan explained all his previous bravado gone. He said, "City Hall might talk about community policing, but our job was to keep certain elements in check. If complaints came in, he would handle them. And he did for years." When asked why he was coming forward, now Brennan's answer was simple and self-serving. "I'm not going to be the only one who pays for following orders." The revelation that Brennan's misconduct was part of a coordinated effort rather than isolated incidents sent shockwaves through the department. As the investigation expanded, other officers began coming forward either voluntarily or under pressure, describing a culture of racial profiling that had been institutionalized through unofficial policies and selective enforcement. Lieutenant Harper, sensing the walls closing in, attempted to flee the jurisdiction but was apprehended at the Canadian border. A search of his home uncovered financial records linking him to several white nationalist organizations and detailed instructions for officers on how to conduct stops that would appear legitimate while targeting specific racial groups. The evidence suggested that what had begun as Zora's wrongful arrest had uncovered a years-long conspiracy that had affected thousands of citizens. Do you believe corrupt systems can truly be reformed from within, or does meaningful change require complete restructuring? Comment number 1. If you think accountability must start at the top with leadership, or number 2, if you believe change begins with individual officers on the street. Hit the like button if you're inspired by how one person's stand against injustice can expose an entire system of corruption. Subscribe to hear more stories about those fighting for equality in all our institutions. The evidence against Brennan and his colleagues is mounting, but will the blue wall of silence crack under pressure, and how will the community respond when they learn the full extent of the systemic discrimination they've been subjected to? Stay with us as this powerful story continues to unfold. The morning headlines blazed across Zora's tablet screen as she sipped her coffee. Police corruption. Probe expands FBI investigation. Reveals systematic racial profiling officer Brennan cooperating with federal authorities. What had begun as a single incident had ballooned into one of the most significant police misconduct investigations in Minneapolis history, with implications that reached into the highest levels of the department. Yet, despite the mounting evidence and public pressure, Zora and her team were encountering increasingly sophisticated resistance from those determined to limit the scope of the investigation. The commissioner wants to talk containment strategy. Torres informed her as he entered her office without knocking his expression tense. They're pushing to frame this as a few bad apples rather than addressing the barrel. Zora set down her tablet unsurprised but disappointed. We have documentation linking at least 20 officers directly to discriminatory practices, plus evidence that supervisors not only knew about it, but actively encouraged it. This goes beyond a few individuals. Torres nodded grimly. That's exactly why there's pressure to contain it. The political fallout from acknowledging systemic issues would be explosive. He hesitated before adding, "There's also concern about your continued visibility in this case. Some feel you're too personally invested." Zora felt a familiar flare of frustration. "My personal investment is precisely why I understand the importance of seeing this through. If I step back now, it sends exactly the wrong message." Before Torres could respond, Zora's phone buzzed with a security alert from her apartment building. The live stream from her hallway camera showed two men in hoodies attempting to pick her lock. She wordlessly turned the phone toward Torres, who immediately called for agents to respond to her address. The break-in attempt was clearly meant to intimidate rather than succeed, the perpetrators fleeing before police arrived. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear: someone wanted her to know she was vulnerable. The incident only strengthened Zora's resolve, though it finally convinced her to accept the protective detail Torres had been urging. Across the city, community tensions were reaching a boiling point. Protests had grown larger and more frequent, with reform advocates demanding complete transparency and accountability. Counter-demonstrations by police supporters had also intensified, creating volatile situations that threatened to erupt into violence. Marcus Washington had become a lightning rod in the increasingly polarized debate. His scholarship offers from prestigious universities were highlighted by supporters as evidence of his bright future and commitment to justice, while detractors attempted to dig up dirt from his social media accounts and school records. "They're trying to make me the issue." Instead of police misconduct, he observed astutely during a meeting with Zora and community leaders at a local church. Same playbook they always use. Despite the pressure, Marcus remained composed, beyond his years, focusing on organizing youth in constructive activism. Meanwhile, Brennan's cooperation had opened unexpected doors in the investigation, but his credibility as a witness was complicated by his history of dishonesty. Prosecutors were building parallel cases, one relying on Brennan's testimony and another independent of it, ensuring that the broader investigation wouldn't collapse if he recanted. The announcement of formal charges against Brennan, Lieutenant Harper, and 3 other officers marked a significant milestone. The charges ranged from civil rights violations and excessive force to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Brennan faced 12 felony counts that could result in decades of imprisonment if convicted on all charges. His defense team responded immediately, leaking portions of Zora's personnel file to sympathetic media outlets. The leaked documents focused on a traumatic case from her early career, where she had been injured during an arrest gone wrong, suggesting she had developed bias against law enforcement as a result. The invasion of privacy was infuriating, but Zora refused to be distracted from the core investigation. "They want to make this about me instead of the evidence," she told Rodriguez during a strategy session. "We can't let them shift the narrative." The media scrutiny became increasingly personal and intense. Conservative outlets questioned Zora's objectivity and professionalism, while progressive media hailed her as a hero taking on systemic racism. Neither portrayal captured the nuanced reality of her approach, which remained methodical and evidence-based, despite the swirl of controversy. The FBI director made a rare public statement supporting Zora and the integrity of the investigation, a move that simultaneously bolstered her position and increased the pressure for impeccable results. The Bureau stands firmly behind Special Agent Mitchell and her work on this case, the director stated during a press conference. "We go where the evidence leads us without fear or favor, regardless of attempts to intimidate or discredit our agents." The statement was a powerful vote of confidence, but it also raised the stakes significantly. As the City Council convened an emergency session to address the growing crisis, Zora was called to testify about her findings. Despite knowing her words would be scrutinized from all sides and likely used out of context by those with agendas, she delivered her testimony with unflinching honesty and precision. "What we have uncovered is not a series of isolated incidents, but a pattern of behavior that was encouraged and protected at multiple levels within the department," she stated, her voice steady, despite the hostile questioning from counsel, members with ties to the police union. The evidence suggests that officers were trained both formally and informally to engage in discriminatory practices while maintaining plausible deniability. Personal attacks followed, as expected, with one council member insinuating that her own experience had clouded her judgment. Zora responded with calm professionalism that highlighted the contrast between her approach and her detractors. "My experience gave me insight into a problem that has affected thousands of citizens, but every finding in our investigation is supported by documentation, testimony, and evidence that would stand independent of any personal experience." The testimony stretched for hours, but Zora never lost her composure or precision, earning reluctant respect even from some skeptics. As she left the chamber, A sea of reporters shouted questions, most of which she declined with a polite, "No comment while the investigation is ongoing." The council session resulted in a commitment to complete overhaul of police oversight mechanisms and the creation of an independent review board with actual enforcement powers, steps that reform advocates had been requesting for years. While these were positive developments, Zora was acutely aware that policy changes alone wouldn't address the deeply rooted cultural issues within the department. Her concerns were validated when Lieutenant Harper, who had been released on bail, despite prosecution arguments that he posed a flight risk, attempted to leave the country. Harper was apprehended at a private airfield preparing to board a chartered plane to a non-extradition country. The pilot, alarmed by Harper's nervous behavior, had quietly alerted authorities. A search of Harper's luggage revealed over $100,000 in cash and a thumb drive containing financial records that expanded the scope of the corruption investigation yet again. The records showed payments from several white nationalist organizations to a foundation that sponsored police training seminars, creating a direct link between extremist ideology and police practices. More disturbing were emails between Harper and several high-profile business leaders discussing the maintenance of proper community standards, a thinly veiled reference to keeping certain neighborhoods segregated through aggressive policing. As the web of corruption and racist ideology became clearer, Brennan made a calculated decision to fully cooperate in exchange for consideration during sentencing. His detailed testimony before a grand jury led to indictments of 10 additional officers and 3 supervisors. During his testimony, Brennan described an unofficial competition among certain officers for harassment of minority citizens, with points awarded for stops, searches, and arrests in specific neighborhoods. It was presented as good police work, focusing on high-crime areas, he explained to prosecutors. But the targets were always the same, and the metrics had nothing to do with actual crime rates. The revelation of this systematic targeting sent shockwaves through the community and led to the resignation of several department officials who claimed they had been unaware of these practices, though evidence increasingly suggested otherwise. As the case expanded, threats against Zora intensified, ranging from online harassment to credible death threats requiring FBI intervention. Despite Torres's concerns, she refused to step back from the investigation. "If I walk away now, it sends exactly the wrong message to everyone who's been victimized by this system," she told him during a tense conversation. "I'm not going to be intimidated into silence." Her stance resonated with the public, particularly after an interview with a respected journalist in which she focused not on her personal experience, but on the broader issues of accountability and equal justice. The interview humanized her without compromising her authority or professionalism, making it harder for critics to dismiss her as biased or politically motivated. On the eve of the trials, Zora received an unexpected call from Officer Kevin Jenkins, who had been present during her arrest but had not been charged due to lack of evidence of active misconduct. "I've been thinking about that night ever since it happened," Jenkins said, his voice hesitant. "I knew something was wrong with how Brennan was handling the situation, but I didn't step in like I should have. I've spent my whole career trying not to make waves, telling myself I was one of the good ones because I didn't personally engage in that behavior. But standing by and doing nothing when you see wrong being done, that's its own kind of wrong." Jenkins offered to testify about the culture within the department, including numerous incidents he had witnessed over his 15-year career, where officers like Brennan had engaged in misconduct, while others looked the other way. His testimony would be particularly valuable, coming from an officer with an otherwise clean record who had no incentive to cooperate other than conscience. As jury selection began for the first trials, the courthouse was surrounded by both protesters demanding justice and police supporters claiming the accused officers were being railroaded. Security measures were unprecedented, with federal marshals supplementing local law enforcement amid concerns about potential violence. Inside the courthouse, prosecutors and defense attorneys engaged in fierce battles over evidence admissibility and witness credibility, with Brennan's testimony being particularly contentious given his history of dishonesty. Despite these challenges, The case against Harper and the other high-ranking officers was strong, built on financial records, emails, testimony from multiple officers, and the recovered dashcam footage that showed the discriminatory practices in action. The jury was seated more quickly than anyone had anticipated, suggesting that despite the polarized public discourse, citizens of diverse backgrounds were united in wanting to see the evidence fairly evaluated. As the trials prepared to begin, Zora received word that the jury had sent a note to the judge indicating they had reached their decision much sooner than expected. The speed of their deliberation could suggest either a strong consensus for conviction or an equally strong rejection of the prosecution's case. As Zora made her way to the courtroom through tight security, she maintained the same composed exterior that had carried her through the ordeal, while internally preparing herself for either outcome and the work that would follow, knowing that regardless of the verdict, the fight for true justice and equality under the law was far from over. The courtroom fell silent as Zora Mitchell took the stand, the weight of expectation palpable in the air. National media filled the gallery, their presence underscoring the case's significance beyond Minneapolis. For many, this had become more than a trial of individual officers. It was an examination of American policing itself. Zora's testimony was meticulously prepared, yet delivered with an authenticity that captivated the courtroom. She recounted the events of that night with clinical precision, neither downplaying nor dramatizing the humiliation and danger she had experienced. As a federal agent, I recognized the proper procedures for verifying credentials. She explained, her voice steady. Those procedures were not followed. Instead, Officer Brennan escalated a routine traffic stop into a dangerous confrontation based on assumptions that appear to have been racially motivated. Defense attorney Victor Sandoval's cross-examination was aggressive from the outset, clearly aiming to provoke an emotional response that might undermine her credibility. Agent Mitchell, isn't it true that your experience has made you biased against law enforcement? He demanded, pacing before the witness stand. No, Zora replied simply. My experience has made me more committed to ensuring that law enforcement adheres to its proper role and procedures. Sandoval shifted tactics, suggesting that her elite education and federal position disconnected her from the realities faced by local police. You've never had to patrol high-crime neighborhoods or make split-second decisions without backup, have you? Zora's response was measured but firm. I've led raids on armed trafficking operations, apprehended violent fugitives, and made life-or-death decisions in the field. The difference is that I've done so while following protocols designed to protect both officer safety and citizens' rights. Each attempt to portray her as anti-police or politically motivated fell flat against her consistent professionalism and evident expertise. By the time Sandoval concluded his questioning, his frustrated expression revealed he had failed to create the narrative he'd intended. Marcus Washington's testimony followed days later, the teenager's composure remarkable as he described recording the incident and his subsequent harassment. I wasn't trying to make a statement or go viral, he explained. I just knew something wrong was happening and thought there should be a record of it. Defense attempts to portray him as an anti-police activist seeking fame backfired, as Marcus's thoughtful responses revealed a young man of principle rather than agenda. I don't hate police, he stated clearly. My uncle is an officer in Chicago. I just believe everyone should be treated with the same respect regardless of who they are. The courtroom dynamics shifted dramatically when Brennan took the stand as part of his plea agreement. Gone was the arrogant officer who had arrested Zora. In his place sat a subdued man whose testimony implicated not only himself, but an entire system. The unofficial policy was clear, he testified. Certain neighborhoods got different treatment. Certain people were automatically suspicious. It wasn't written down anywhere, but everyone understood. He described training sessions, where euphemisms like proactive policing and quality of life enforcement were used to justify targeting minority communities. Most shocking was his description of an unofficial competition among some officers. There was a tally system, he admitted. Points for stops, searches, arrests. Extra points if you could get someone to consent to a search or find a reason to impound a vehicle. The supervisors never officially acknowledged it, but they rewarded the officers with the highest numbers, with better shifts and overtime opportunities. As Brennan continued, he revealed how complaints were systematically undermined. If someone filed a complaint, Lieutenant Harper would handle it personally. Witnesses would be intimidated, dashcam footage would go missing, and the complainant's background would be thoroughly investigated for anything that might discredit them. The revelation that dozens of legitimate complaints had been buried over the years led to audible reactions from the gallery. Prosecutors presented evidence of this systematic suppression, internal emails discussing how to manage complaints, statistical analyses showing dramatic disparities in enforcement actions across racial lines, and testimony from citizens, whose legitimate grievances had been dismissed or ignored. Evidence mounted showing that what had happened to Zora was not an isolated incident, but part of an entrenched pattern affecting thousands of citizens. The most unexpected testimony came from Officer Jenkins, who had been present during Zora's arrest but had remained silent until now. "I witnessed misconduct repeatedly throughout my career," he admitted, his voice reflecting both shame and relief at finally speaking out. "We were taught early on that certain officers were untouchable, that questioning their methods would make you an outsider." He described a culture where officers who raised concerns about misconduct were labeled soft or not team players, often finding themselves without backup in dangerous situations or assigned to the least desirable shifts. You learned to look the other way to convince yourself it wasn't your business, or that maybe the aggressive tactics were necessary in certain neighborhoods. His testimony was particularly powerful as he had no plea deal or immunity agreement. He was testifying solely as a matter of conscience, risking his career and reputation to speak the truth. Throughout the trials of Brennan Harper and the other officers, evidence continued to emerge about the extent of the corruption. Financial records revealed that asset forfeitures from targeted neighborhoods had been systematically misappropriated, with some funds flowing to the private foundation that sponsored discriminatory training programs. Text messages between officers contained explicitly racist language and celebrations of particularly humiliating arrests. One by one, the defenses constructed by Sandoval and the other attorneys crumbled under the weight of evidence. Their attempts to portray the accused as dedicated officers making difficult decisions in dangerous situations couldn't withstand the documented pattern of targeting specific communities regardless of actual crime rates or individual behavior. As closing arguments approached, several additional officers resigned rather than face investigation, effectively admitting guilt while hoping to avoid prosecution. The city announced sweeping changes to policing policies, though reform advocates remained skeptical about implementation without structural oversight changes. The mayor established a commission to examine all aspects of the police department, from hiring and training to discipline and community relations. After days of testimony and evidence presentation, the case finally went to the jury. Legal experts predicted lengthy deliberations given the complexity of the charges and the polarized public opinion surrounding the case. However, after less than 6 hours, the jury sent word that they had reached verdicts on all counts. The speed of their decision sent shockwaves through both prosecution and defense teams, neither certain what it signified. As court officers prepared for the verdict announcement, Zora sat in the gallery outwardly composed, but inwardly bracing for either outcome. Months of investigation, threats, media scrutiny, and personal sacrifice had led to this moment. Whatever the jury decided, she knew the larger fight for justice and accountability would continue long after this particular case concluded. The courtroom doors opened to admit the jury, their expressions carefully neutral as they filed in. The judge called for order as spectators, media, and legal teams settled into an expectant hush. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge inquired of the foreperson, a middle-aged black woman who had remained inscrutable throughout the trial. "We have, Your Honor," she replied, handing the verdict forms to the bailiff. As the bailiff carried the papers to the judge, Zora noticed Marcus Washington in the back row, his young face solemn yet hopeful. Their eyes met briefly in silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them both to this moment, a chance encounter that had evolved into a movement for accountability and change. The courtroom erupted in commotion as the verdicts were read aloud, one after another guilty. Richard Brennan, convicted on 8 felony counts, including civil rights violations, filing false reports, and obstruction of justice. Lieutenant James Harper, found guilty on all 15 charges, including conspiracy evidence tampering and criminal abuse of authority. 3 other officers, each receiving multiple guilty verdicts for their roles in the systematic misconduct. The judge called repeatedly for order, as reactions rippled through the packed gallery, ranging from vindication to disbelief. Zora remained still amid the chaos, her expression revealing nothing of the complex emotions beneath her professional exterior. This moment represented not personal victory but a rare instance of accountability, in a system designed to resist it. Sentencing would follow weeks later, with Harper receiving the harshest punishment, 12 years in federal prison for orchestrating the cover-ups and leading the discriminatory practices. Brennan received 8 years, reduced from a potential 20-year sentence due to his cooperation. The other officers received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with investigators. Standing on the courthouse steps after sentencing, Zora finally addressed the media directly. Today's verdicts represent a step toward justice, not just for me, but for every person who has been unfairly targeted, humiliated, or harmed by those sworn to protect and serve. She stated, the cameras capturing her measured words for national broadcasts. But verdicts alone cannot heal communities or transform systems. Real justice requires ongoing commitment to equal treatment under the law and mechanisms that ensure accountability at every level. She acknowledged the courage of citizens who had come forward to share their experiences despite intimidation and fear. Their testimony made these convictions possible. Their willingness to stand up for justice despite the personal cost exemplifies the citizenship our democracy depends upon. Rather than declaring mission accomplished, Zora emphasized the work ahead. This case has exposed deep structural problems that extend beyond individual officers. Addressing those problems will require sustained effort and fundamental changes to how we approach public safety and community well-being. Her words set the tone for the changes that would follow in Minneapolis and eventually ripple outward to departments across the country. 6 months after the verdicts, the transformation was already visible. The City Council had established the Civilian Oversight Board with unprecedented authority, including subpoena power and the ability to recommend discipline up to termination. Crucially, the board's decisions could not be overruled by the police chief or union arbitration, creating true accountability for the first time. Marcus Washington had accepted a full scholarship to Howard University's political science program and an internship with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. His organization, Record and Report, had grown into a national network training young people in their rights and responsibilities when documenting police interactions. The movement he had started with a single video had evolved into a sophisticated grassroots effort for transparency and accountability. Zora herself had been promoted to lead a new FBI division focused specifically on investigating patterns of civil rights violations within law enforcement agencies. The creation of the division represented an institutional acknowledgement that addressing systemic misconduct required specialized expertise and dedicated resources. While these developments represented meaningful progress, the road to true transformation remained challenging. Resistance came from entrenched interests, including police unions that fought oversight measures through legal challenges and political pressure. Budget constraints threatened to undermine reform initiatives, and public attention inevitably began to drift toward other issues as the initial outrage faded. It was in this context that Zora received an unexpected letter from Richard Brennan, now serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. "I've had a lot of time to think about the kind of officer I became and the harm I caused," he wrote. "No apology can undo what I did to you, and so many others, but I want you to know that I understand now what I couldn't or wouldn't see before." The letter continued with reflections on how he had been socialized into a culture of racism and how the power of his badge had corrupted him gradually over years. "The system rewarded the very behavior that was destroying communities, and the oath I took to serve them. I'm not saying this to excuse what I did, but to explain how good people can become monsters when the institution enables and rewards the worst impulses. After careful consideration, Zora arranged to visit Brennan at the prison. Their conversation, conducted through plexiglass in the visitation area, was tense at first, but evolved into a profound discussion about accountability, redemption, and the possibility of contributing positively even after serious wrongdoing. "I can't give you absolution," Zora told him directly. "That's not mine to give. But I believe in the capacity for people to change and to use their experiences, even terrible ones, to help others avoid similar paths." Brennan nodded his eyes, reflecting a humility that had been entirely absent during their first encounter. "I've been speaking with other officers in pre-service training, sharing my story as a cautionary tale," he explained. "It's the least I can do, but maybe it helps someone resist the culture that corrupted me." The conversation had no fairy tale ending, no dramatic reconciliation, but it represented something perhaps more valuable, an honest reckoning with harm and responsibility. Inspired partly by that unexpected exchange, Zora established the Zora Mitchell Foundation for Law Enforcement Reform, named after her grandmother who had marched for civil rights in the 1960s. The foundation focused on creating dialogue between communities and police, developing evidence-based training programs, addressing implicit bias, and providing support for whistleblowers who exposed misconduct within their departments. Many who had been victimized by discriminatory policing found purpose in working with the foundation, transforming their trauma into advocacy for systemic change. Kevin Jenkins, who had risked his career to testify truthfully, now led training sessions for police recruits, sharing his experiences of moral compromise and the importance of moral courage in law enforcement. "The badge doesn't give you power," he would tell each new class. "It gives you responsibility. When you forget that distinction, you've already lost your way." Captain Eleanor West, who had supported the investigation from the beginning, despite institutional pressure, implemented new accountability measures that became a model for departments nationwide. Her leadership demonstrated that reform could come from within when courageous individuals refused to accept the status quo. For Zora, perhaps the most meaningful outcome came during a graduation ceremony at the Minneapolis Police Academy 1 year after the verdicts. As the keynote speaker, she looked out at the diverse faces of the new officers, many inspired to join the force, specifically because of the reforms that had followed the case. "You are entering law enforcement at a pivotal moment," she told them. "You have the opportunity to define what policing looks like in communities that have often experienced it as an occupying force rather than a public service. The badge you'll receive today can be a symbol of trust or a tool of oppression. Which it becomes depends on the choices you make every day in every interaction." As she concluded her speech, Zora reflected on the journey from that night when Brennan had pressed his knee into her back to this moment of potential transformation. The changes were real, but fragile, requiring constant vigilance and commitment to sustain. There was no neat ending to the story, no point at which justice could be declared complete. Instead, there was the ongoing work of building systems worthy of public trust and ensuring that no badge placed anyone above accountability. In that continuity, in the understanding that justice is a process rather than a destination, lay both the challenge and the hope for genuine change. What do you think is the most important reform needed in policing today? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can build systems that provide both safety and justice for all communities. If this story moved you or made you think differently about accountability in law enforcement, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore important social issues. Share this video with someone who might benefit from understanding how individual courage can lead to systemic change. Thank you for joining us for this powerful journey from injustice to accountability. Remember that in a democracy, the work of justice belongs to all of us, not just those who wear badges or sit on benches. This powerful narrative illustrates how systemic racism thrives when accountability fails. Zora Mitchell's ordeal demonstrates that even professional credentials and status cannot fully shield Black Americans from prejudice. What began as one officer's racist actions revealed an entire infrastructure of discrimination protected by institutional silence and corrupt leadership. True change requires more than removing bad apples. It demands examining the soil in which they grew. The story highlights the critical role of citizen documentation in an era where video evidence can spark movements and create undeniable records of injustice. Marcus Washington's courage to film the encounter changed countless lives and exposed long-hidden abuses. We see how speaking truth to power carries risks, but creates ripples that become waves of transformation. Individual courage, whether from victims like Zora, witnesses like Marcus, or insiders like Jenkins, who eventually broke ranks, proves essential to dismantling entrenched systems. Most importantly, the narrative shows that justice isn't a singular event, but an ongoing commitment. Victory in courtrooms matters, but lasting change happens through reformed policies, shifted cultures, and continuous vigilance. The badge represents not power but responsibility, to uphold equal justice and protect the dignity of every person regardless of their skin color. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation where someone abused their authority? How did you respond? Your voice matters in this ongoing conversation about accountability and justice. Comment below with your thoughts on what needs to change in our systems to ensure equal treatment for everyone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find this important message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shine light on social injustice and the fight for equality. Share this video with someone who might need to understand the reality many people face every day. Together we can build a world where badges represent service rather than dominance and where justice truly works for all. Thank you for listening, and remember, change begins when brave individuals refuse to accept the unacceptable.